Hey everyone, welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. I am one of your co-hosts, Johnny Freakin Fantasy. You can see my Twitter name right under me at Johnny Freakin F1. Tonight I am rocking with the IDP tipster Gary. Welcome to our show. Last week we talked a little bit about free agent linebackers. That was inside linebackers, and this week we are going to talk about the upcoming free agency class for edge rushers. Before I get started, I just want to say hello over there to my co-host Gary. Hello, Gary. Welcome tonight. Thanks for running it back with me on this podcast. Blessed to have you. Would you like to say anything before we get started?
Always happy to, man. Always happy to. I'm excited about these rankings, just like I was last week. You hooked them up nicely, and I'm interested to hear your parameters because you get, especially in the second tier, which make sure you guys keep an eye out for later in the week. We'll have a second tier video coming out. Especially a couple of those guys, man, is pretty interesting. So, but not to change the subject about this first tier. Lay it out for me. What you think what's going to happen in the Super Bowl, man? Who's going to win this thing? What's this game flow going to be like? And looking at the early line right now, it's San Francisco's -2 at 105, -105, and then you got the Chiefs at +2. They get to 2 points at -115. Tell me if as a betting man, which I think you are,
Yeah.
which one you would take. But start off with that game tape for me.
So with this pick, I'm going to go with San Francisco. I think they'll take it by at least 3 or 4 points. To me, it's a great game, and I'm happy these two teams made it. It's nice to see Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey. There's a part of me that wants to see Kelsey, win it and ride off in the sunset. But at the same time, I think they were kind of lucky to get there. It is nice to see them back. But I think that this year that the 49ers have their number. I just think their offense is complete, and I don't think they're going anywhere. I mean, I think they have a good couple of years to stretch and try to make this thing not only for this year, but for the upcoming years too. So I'm going to roll with San Francisco. I think Kansas City's kind of hobbling in there, rough offensive line. I think this is the year that San Fran gets on top and runs a dynasty, starts a dynasty with Christian McCaffrey and company.
Cool.
The listeners at home, we are talking about Dynasty here, Dynasty IDP. So we're, like I said before, we're talking about the edge rushers, the defensive ends, the outside linebackers. We want guys who are going to not only get tackles, but a fair amount of sacks too. And we have a nice blend, especially in the second tier with that, because for me, it gets a little tricky down there. But, you can look on PFF, you can look on other websites, and you'll see some guys that I have on my rankings are, the heavy hitters and on pretty much everyone's free agent, top rankings. But I did stretch it out there, especially for people that like myself playing a lot of tackle heavy leagues. So, there is, as much as we talk about edge rushers needing to get those sacks, you can still pay it forward and get solid value there with those tackles. So you're going to see a nice blend in these rankings. Keep in mind, this is Dynasty perspective. So I think I'll give you a spoiler alert, one guy on this list of these two tiers of all 12 people that is over 30 or older. So we did favor the younger guys here. But one thing about me, if you listened to me before, you've heard me say that don't get caught in the years. Don't get caught up with the years, how old somebody is. We see a lot of young guys, especially at this position. It's a volatile position. Guys kind of find their form at 27, 28, even into their 30s. And there's some guys close to 30 on this list that are still in their prime and coming to it right now. So, but for general speaking, what I looked at is maybe to say, I'm not looking at it and saying 30s old. I'm saying 30s in their prime. So for me, we are trying to give you the best dynasty rankings moving forward, but don't forget about the year or two ahead. That's just as important. You might be able to fool somebody too, making trades with one of these older guys too. But right now we are going to get into our tier one. But before we do that, I just want to say, if you won your league, if you came in third, if you came in last, if your commissioner is a kind-hearted gentleman, go to trophysmack.com. It is not too late to get your fantasy football trophies. Now, if you haven't checked out Trophy Smack before, please do that. It's a great website. nowadays I hear a lot of people, a lot of analysts I talk to that have trophies in their fantasy football leagues. That's awesome. I like that. It's competitive. You're playing for more than pride and money. So you're playing for that gold, right? So go to fantasy trophysmack.com. And when you go to trophysmack.com, when you use the promo code IDP, guys, you will get a free ring when you buy either a trophy or a belt. Once again, use the promo code IDP, guys, at trophysmack.com, and you will receive a free ring when you buy a trophy or a belt. Gary, are you ready to get into these Tier 1 rankings here for the defensive end position?
Oh yeah, brother. Let's roll, man. Let's get this first guy going.
Okay. Well, with that being said, we're going to talk about only 1 through 6, our Tier 1 guys right now. So this is the bread and butter of the free agency pool, guys who probably will land big contracts, whether it be single year, multi-year, but they've earned a payday. And maybe that's speculation and maybe that's stats, but you're going to hear my logic behind this. And coming in, the first name we'll talk about, the big ticket here, the big fish, and that's Josh Allen from Jacksonville. Josh Allen, man, he had a great year. Filled up the stat sheet, and really, I don't know if it all could have been any better for him. He was second in the NFL, the complete NFL, second in sacks with 17.5. He was also third in the league in quarterback hits. So if you're playing in a league that has QB hits, this is an additional. To me, you might be thinking that's not on my stat sheet, but some leagues do have quarterback hits as points. So Josh Allen, deserves his flowers in that category. To me, Josh Allen, he definitely deserved it, right? He had his career year. I don't think that Jacksonville is going to, invest long-term in him personally. I think maybe he doesn't get a contract at all from them and they move on. Maybe he gets a 1 year, maybe he gets the franchise tag or a 1 year contract and stays. At that point, they can use him, his name as trade bait. Maybe that would be something in the cards there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they just resign the dude. He's a great player. It took him kind of a couple years. Like I said, 21, 22, it takes a while to get going. So here he is. He's in the prime of his career, 26 years old. He's putting all the pieces together as we saw last year. I expect this to be Josh Allen for the future, for the current and future. Gary, how about you?
I have to agree with you. I almost wonder if they'll just tag him for this year, looking ahead at the 2025 free agents. They're going to have quite a bit of money that could be coming up. They definitely shouldn't let this guy walk, but we shouldn't think that somebody might not sneak in there and lure him away. Somebody like Washington that is going to be in desperate need of a rebound or a rebuild is sitting on a huge amount of money, where Jacksonville is sitting on right now, according to Sports Track, about 17 million. But they don't have anybody other than Josh Allen really of any high concern as a free agent this year. So might find somebody like Foye Oluokun taking a little bit of a pay cut or restructuring that big contract that he's got going on as he heads into his last season with them technically on contract. So, I mean, there's some wiggle room here. So, but I could definitely think that they're going to make the biggest push they can to keep Josh Allen, and their safest way is probably to tag him for this year.
Yeah, and I did read some interesting situations. When you're researching for this, I'm trying to give you the best advice, right? The best insight from teams, from reporters, right? And I've heard a lot of crazy situations. One factor in this Josh Allen situation is they do have Calvin Ridley on the offensive side. They're going to have to do something with him. And one scenario I did see, just for laughs and giggles here, we'll say that somebody had a claim that Las Vegas was going to trade Devontae Adams, get back Calvin Ridley, and then in that trade they would also get Josh Allen. So that would be a huge splash. But the why I mentioned Calvin Ridley is because the person who said that did have a good point. And that was, Josh Allen's their bread and butter, right? They have to make a tough choice, maybe between these two. Their scare was that if Calvin Ridley was franchise tag, then they wouldn't be able to use a franchise tag on Josh Allen. They'd have to maybe offer him a contract, and then the budget wouldn't be in the fold. So interesting to see there on the offensive side what happens with Calvin Ridley. But if we're being a outside football fan, you'd have to think that Josh Allen locking him up long term is to me more the priority than Calvin Ridley. All right, and for number 2 on our list, we are going to move into the number 2 player, and that is Brian Burns. Now, when I'm looking at Brian Burns, when I'm scouting him for what I'm going to talk about, one of the things that one of these stats I like to keep track of is career games. And I didn't mention this with Josh Allen because Josh Allen, he had a couple injuries that here and there. A lot of defensive ends, a lot of outside linebackers have injuries. That's not uncommon. Josh Allen did play 74 out of 83 games. But with Brian Burns, in contrast, to me, I highlight this number because out of 83 games possibly could have played, he's played 80 of them. So he's only missed 3 games in his 5-year career. To me, that's a little bit of an Iron Man, right? So that's something that it's not a stat that's talked about often, but yeah, when we talk about durability, 80 out of 83, possible games played is a great talking point. Brian Burns is that dude. He brings a lot of intensity on the field. He not only gets a lot of sacks, right? A little bit of a not as penultimate as maybe a Josh Allen or a TJ Watt, guys like that. But Brian Burns does make noise in sacks too. Over his 5-year career, he's had 46 sacks, which that is something to write home about. Tackles for loss, he gives you a good amount of tackles for loss. He had 16 this year in his career. He's had 59. Somebody who doesn't exactly get the quarterback hits as Josh Allen. Josh Allen had 33 this year. Brian Burns 18, but all in all, Josh Allen only has 8 more quarterback hits on his career than Brian Burns. Brian Burns is, to me, another kind of like a spitting image here of what I said about Josh Allen in the situation. Nobody wants to see Brian Burns go. He's a great player, brings a lot of intensity. But the thing about Brian Burns, Carolina's got a tough decision to make, and they already had one this past year. They did not trade him. They decided to hold on to him. He's 25 years old, rightfully so. Even though you are rebuilding, you don't want to start, from ground zero. You have this great player. They did not trade him. They're in the same kind of similar situation this year. Do they franchise tag him? I don't think that they just straight up let him walk. It's too much value to be letting go. So to me, I'd like to see a 1 year, 1 year franchise tag, and maybe he gets traded elsewhere, this upcoming season in 2024. Now, one interesting piece of information here. Last year, I'm talking in 2022. When I'm thinking of Brian Burns and where he could possibly land, 2022, there was a point in time where the LA Rams, they offered 2 first-round picks for Brian Burns. This was in 2022. And Carolina, they scoffed at the offer. They didn't take it. So to me, that says 2 things. That says how bad a team like LA Rams wants a guy like Brian Burns, right? And at the same time, it tells me how much Carolina values him, right? So I agree with both of their sides. This guy's great. He's one of the best, one of the best edge rushers there is in the game. He's young. He deserves that money. But I'm kind of torn. I think that either he signs elsewhere or gets a 1-year deal and gets traded next year. What do you say, Gary?
Yeah, it's tough looking at these numbers. I mean, you got like 31 million on the cap right now, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. But you also got Frankie Louvu that's a free agent this year, and it's undeniable. You got to make a choice between him and then looking at Derek Brown in 2025. They got some decisions to make, and I'm pretty sure they're in a pretty good rebuild right now.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, they're in the thick of it, that's for sure.
He's just a tier 1 target, no matter how you look at it. And I also liked how it sounded like you was favoring Burns over Josh Allen. That's actually how I've been for the last few years. I have too. I think Burns has shown more over his career than Josh Allen, which is, he happened to be in his 4th year here for a contract. So he needed to impress. They went and got Travon Walker last year or 2 years ago. No, it was last year. They got Travon Walker. They spent big capital on him too. It's a weird situation how these two could actually, both very well end up somewhere else, just knowing that their position is such in high demand at their level of play.
And you're right. You made a good point, Gary. And that is to say that to this point, Brian Burns was the coveted of the two, right? Brian Burns, this is his 4th straight season with a 70 or higher passing rush grade, right? It's kind of a shame that he had an injured first half of the year. He had a strong second half, but really kind of small injuries, scuffed his year this year. And when we do look at the numbers, Brian Burns did have 16 less tackles than Josh Allen. He did have not even half as many tackles. Half as many sacks. He had 8 when Josh Allen had 17 and a half. Now, you could be saying, if you're buying into these numbers and you're saying that's what it's going to be next year, I'd say take it with a grain of salt. Like Gary said, I'm talking up Brian Burns. I wouldn't be surprised if he had the better year than Josh Allen. And it's early. We're talking about prospective landing spots. If they both get re-signed, we can probably grade them the same. If they go to different places, it's tough to grade. Who else is going to be with him? Is he going to be, doubled every play? So, all right. So last week I dropped a good stat about Frankie Louvu, and that was he was somebody at the linebacker position who had at least 100 tackles and 5 sacks. Well, for the defensive end position, there were 2 players in the NFL to have at least 80 tackles and over 10 sacks. Those 2 players were Danielle Hunter and Max Crosby. So great company there for Danielle Hunter. He's somebody who does it not only in the sacks, right? If you're in a sack heavy league, good. If you're in a balanced league, great. If you're in a tackles heavy league, right? Terrific guy. So to me, the fact that he's 29, I'm not looking down on it. I think, he's in his prime right now. I think he's still got a couple more years to be elite. So I really like Danielle Hunter. I think that he's going to, find success no matter if he stays, if he goes elsewhere. I think he's a great player, and I really hope for the Vikings perspective that he stays there. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. Time will tell. Mm-hmm. But Danielle Hunter, for being 29, defies age here. To me, I'm looking at that and saying he's a great player. If I have him, I'm not trying to sell him. I'm not worried about where he's going. To me, he's a little bit bulletproof, right? So I'm going to ride Danielle Hunter out until I see some decline. But other than that, at number 3, Danielle Hunter can't get much better. Now we'll move on to number 4. Now, number 4, this guy is somebody who might be ranked a little bit lower. And to me, that was a little bit of a surprise. Maybe when we talk about like real life stats, you might drop him. There's some other guys on this list that PFF numbers are great or superior. But to me, a guy who had a terrific year, but he still does have some questions, that is Jonathan Greenard. Okay. So Jonathan Greenard, actually, you might not have heard this stat before. I've heard a couple people say it so far. Great stat. Jonathan Greenard, in this year, 2023, he had as many sacks, hits, and hurries this year as he did in his whole career. And that would be, I want to say 4 seasons. That's correct. 4 seasons.
Nice. Yeah.
Wow. So Jonathan Greenard, we'd expect him to light up the world, right, with stats. And he did have 12 and a half sacks, which was great. Now, the tackles were a little bit down. He only had 52. And he's somebody who, he's not playing as many snaps as, quite frankly, as these other pass rushers. Jonathan Greenard only played 63% of defensive snaps. And I'm not saying that's terrible. I'm not saying you can't make an impact, because there's actually somebody on this tier with a lower snap share than Greenard. But to me, that's a room for improvement. That's something that I can see. Like when we talk about elites, we got Josh Allen's, 79, 80%. We've got Brian Burns, 83%. Danielle Hunter, 89%, right? So when we talk about the J.J. Watts, Max Crosby's, Myles Garrett's, these guys play a little bit more. But at the same time, if you had Jonathan Greenard in fantasy this year, you are not scoffing at what he did, at his resume. It was terrific this year. He ended up, like I said, 12 and a half sacks. He had 15 tackles for loss. That not necessarily somebody who's going to make a lot of plays unless there's sacks in the backfield. But he did also have 22 quarterback hits. So to me, I really like Jonathan Greenard. I'm sure you do too. He's 26 years old. He's somebody who's coming into the peak of his career. You wouldn't say he reached it this year already. The only thing I'm worried about is Houston going to be able to resign this guy, or do they maybe give him a franchise tag and trade him? I think they really should not scoff here at what they have. How about you, Gary? What do you think about Greenard?
They definitely have the cash to get it done, and I think he's a pretty strong veteran presence on that defensive line. So I don't think D'Amico Ryans is going to let this guy walk, and I also don't think he's going to break the bank for them, necessarily. There's a lot of appeal to be on the Houston's team right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
2024 and 25 looking kind of nice. So I could see him being re-signed for a fairly decent contract, but I don't think anybody's going to break the bank necessarily. I think he's more valuable to Houston than what he might be elsewhere. It just depends. He had a great year though. Like you said, he matched his career year, and it's actually 4 years. Yep.
Yeah, so Jonathan Greenard is, somebody who, like I said, I have him here at number 4. You'll see in other people's rankings, they might have him at 6, they might have him at 5. But to me, I'm going in with the assumption that he is back next year, right? Nothing really guaranteed past that. But I do think he's back next year. Like Gary said, they know what they have in him. It's not like they're somebody who's going to start from ground zero like the Panthers. They're an established team. We weren't too far from seeing them make a nice deep playoff run, right?
And like you said, age-wise, you mentioned it earlier, he's basically hitting his prime. He's only 25, 26 years old. These guys nowadays, that 28, 29, like you mentioned, that's a viable thing.
Right. So just coming into his prime at 26 years old, there is a little bit of a red flag there. When we look at the career games, out of 67 potential games, he's played 48. So he's missed 19 games. To me, if I'm getting the player that Jonathan Greenard has grown into be, to me, it's out the window. I would pay him. I would bring him back for next year. They need him. Like we said, they need him. They're talking about having problems, at linebacker. Losing Jonathan Greenard isn't going to help those problems, right? So to me, he's
don't lose the secure part. Don't lose the secure guy. They're the only one that doesn't have a question mark up there in that front line. You don't want to let him walk.
Exactly. You have a young Will Anderson opposing, on the other side. Not only to say that, having Jonathan Greenard helps Will Anderson, but at the same time, having not on the field, but off the field too, just as important, right? Jonathan Greenard's a vet now. He's somebody that can mentor Anderson, right? So I think that they don't want to really mess with what they have. They want to, if anything, add, not subtract. So I think Jonathan Greenard here, I'm calling it. He's going to be back. He's going to be fruitful for IDP next year in years to come. So 26 years old, I really like him a lot. He's a little bit higher on my rankings. Moving on to number 5, we have an interesting name here. Somebody who, in the same token, I'll mention the snap count. This guy only played 42 defensive snaps percentage-wise this year. He has an absurd pass rush ability, though. He's graded high back-to-back years, actually, this year and 2022. But somebody who's not getting a lot of love, and somebody who's not getting a lot of tackles, and that is Bryce Huff from New York. Bryce Huff, out of 67 total games, has played 54. Check. He has 4 years under his belt, 65 total tackles. To me, that's a little bit of down, right? We're talking about elites here with this tier 1. Somebody who's actually deficient in that category. This year, he only had 19 solos and 10 assists. So 29 tackles. You're probably asking me, Johnny, why is he on this list? Well, to answer your question, he also had 10 sacks this year. Career-wise, he has 17 and a half. Last year, we kind of saw, keep in mind, this is somebody undrafted. This is somebody who took a while to get going, but New York brought him in last year. He had a nice year, 2022. We were wondering, is that going to be, is he going to be a full-time player? Or, is this who he is? Well, we got a little bit better this year, but still at the same time, 42% of snaps is certainly not cutting it, and especially if you're only getting 30 tackles. So to me, I have him ranked high, as do others, because I think that he gets paid elsewhere. I know that New York drafted a guy in the first round. I'm drawing a blank on the name last year. So it's not like they don't have guys. It's not like they absolutely need their only piece. They have a solid core there, young guys, and I think that he might earn a bag elsewhere. I think that he's probably betting on himself, not taking a hometown discount. He might be saying, and to give an asterisk as to why the snaps were low, he does not grade well in run defense. So that's kind of his, we know it's your bugaboo. We know it about you, but is that going to change with more snaps? Well, what I'm guaranteeing is more snaps means more tackles. But is he going to deserve those snaps? Is he going to get exposed? I'm not sure of that, but I do think that Bryce Huff has earned a nice contract. I think Spot Track has him going 18, 20 million a year, something like that. So that's good money. We're not talking about an elite edge rusher money, but we're talking about solid amount for an edge rusher. If he gets $20 million a year, I don't think he can turn that down for a hometown discount. What do you think, Gary?
I think I'd crap my pants, brother, if he gets 20 mil. I mean, that might be his market value. I think he gets a nice, kind of an earn a contract somewhere. I think we could see him something like along the lines of Jonathan Cooper down there in Denver. Somebody that's been out here for a while, and they finally get their opportunity. He was working off the strong side. You got John Johnson or Jimmy Johnson?
Jermaine Johnson.
Jermaine Johnson, yeah, Jermaine Johnson on the other side. It was his second year, and he did well. And they do have some other depth. Out of the blue, for a guy that was in his third year, they decided to give him $4 million last year too, and so they knew that he was coming in having him as a starter. But they only got $7 million or so right now, according to Sports Track, over the salary cap. So they've got some other things that they might address, and considering what they did do in the draft, I could see him getting another start somewhere. I would be shocked at 20 mil a year, man. You got another guy in tier 2 that we're going to be talking about with Jennings that I love. These guys, they don't have to be full-time guys anymore to hold any value. But when they have the upside, Bryce Huff is still young, and wherever he goes, I'm going to be interested in following.
Absolutely. And you know what? Let me just say this right off the bat. 10 sacks is nothing to scoff about, right? That's top 25 in the NFL. Not even 25 guys. 24 got 10.5 sacks. So Josh Huff is in good company there, right? He's if you're a sack heavy league, Josh Huff, you probably already know about him. He's probably rostered, right? But in those balanced leagues, he's somebody who kind of isn't the most sexy guy, but because the tackles aren't there. But at the same time, 10 sacks, that'll help. That's going to help you for your fantasy team. And if we're talking only at 42% of snaps, and you're somebody who knows, and I said Josh Huff, I've been calling him Josh Huff, Bryce Huff. And if you're somebody who's a fan of Bryce Huff, and you probably have watched him. If you're a Jets fan, you probably have watched him more than me. Maybe more about him, right? But what I'm going to tell you is if you're betting on Bryce Huff to go somewhere and land a big contract, right? You're probably buying into him. You probably like him more than me. I don't know that that snap share will ever get there. Like Gary said, you don't have to play 80% of snaps. Sometimes guys find their niche with 40, 50, right? It's not strange. So is he going to take it to that next level? I think the contract, if he gets paid a contract, he's going to have to. And I think the tackles will come, hopefully that's something he works on. But, as a free agent, if to your name, you have 10 sacks to say, I did this last year, right? You're going to get marketability. You're going to get paid somewhere. Someone sees value in that. So in today's world, 10 sacks speaks volumes. So I think Bryce Huff is somebody who, is, like I said, not the sexiest name, but somebody that don't be surprised if he has a big year next year and it's with somewhere else. And with that, we are going to go to our last player in Tier 1, number 6. I'm going to give you kind of a sleeper here, someone who, people might be a bad taste in their mouth, they might be upset at, but to me, that's a young guy. And again, if you want to look at this at Dynasty as it's such a young thing, then you're probably buying this hype. But somebody who definitely has not, has definitely not put pencil to paper as far as, earning the elite tier status for defensive ends, and that's Chase Young at only 24 years old. Chase Young, he's missed 24 games in his career. He's only had 67 games. He's only played 43. So he's missed 24 games, red flag, right? The solos and the assists, he only had 25 total tackles this year. So he's not really helping you in that category either. Maybe that's something that can, change. I'm not guaranteeing that. But yeah, for Chase Young, I mean, having 7.5 sacks, playing for 2 teams, the team was in shambles in Washington there. They lost a couple guys to trades, his battering mates, edge rushers there. So Chase Young kind of, to me, I'm throwing this year out in a way. He did some great things. He had some great plays, but somebody who kind of is not showing up to do it every play, right? He's somebody who you see flashes in a pan. You're wondering, is this ever going to stick? And if you're somebody who's a naysayer, I could understand you. I could go 50-50 on it. But with Chase Young, the kind of the prowess that he has, to me, it's kind of like a Devin White, somebody who's still young, somebody who has showed before, good things and has obviously been a staple, to this point in his career. In college, he was first round pick, so Chase Young, I like him a lot long term, especially if he stays in San Francisco. And that's one thing that a caveat I have with this number, him being at number 6, is that I would like to see him. I don't think he's earned that contract, big contract anywhere else. And I don't think really any team's going to give him more than 1 or 2, maybe, year contract. But I'd like to see him have an off season to stick with you. And keep in mind, this is Chase Young. This next game, the Super Bowl, is big for him. If Chase Young shows up in this game against a bad offensive line for Kansas City, right, maybe that kind of lifts his stock up, his market value. But at the same time, I'd like to see him kind of get an off season with San Francisco. They have good coaching there, right? Good team. I'd like to see him kind of get some stability. And at that point, whether they bring him back next year for a 1 year, they might franchise tag him. He might get a 1-year deal elsewhere. But I really want to see what magic the coaches from San Francisco can kind of work on Chase Young, because at 24 years old, I get it. There's red flags, and I pointed them out. He hasn't been on the field. He's not getting a lot of tackles. 7.5 sacks, that's not great. It's not elite, right? But there's a little bit of flirting here with, his breakout. I don't know if it's just me, if I'm crazy. Gary, what do you say about Chase Young?
As a high state fan, this always kills me to recite myself, but I told people to avoid him from the time that he was picked so high in the draft by Washington. He's always had a habit of showing up for the big game in the past, and he did not show up for the big game for the NFL. He's been injured a lot. Can't hold that against a guy. This was definitely moved by San Fran to make a push for the Super Bowl this year. It's debatable, man. They ain't got much cap at all next year. So I think that we might see Chase Young somewhere else. I got to be 100% honest. I think somebody is probably endured with him enough that they're going to come and offer him a nice little package that San Fran's going to have a hard time, considering that it's got Hargrave and just looking at the contracts. I don't know, brother. I do think Chase Young's earned a chance somewhere else. And if it was me looking inside the tier, I love where you have him, and that he wasn't a top 3 or amongst the top 4 even. I like him below Huff and Greenard for the simple fact is that I'm only on a buy low level for him at all, at a bargain. You know what I mean? Because he sure the hell hadn't impressed at San Fran when he came over here on trade. And I know it is from the strong side of the line why you got Nick Bosa and Hargrave mainly working off the other. But geez, man, get a sack, would you?
Right.
So right. Yeah, the production might be there. I don't think we wash our hands of him, but wherever he lands or whatever they finagle in the future here for him, in San Fran, or believe it or not, I think I heard Chicago might be interested, but you know how that shit goes this time of the year. Those off-season reports, they're going to put him in Sweet or Sweat back together. I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of decent free agents out here this year, so I think there's going to be a market for him. But I mean, he's not at the top of my market.
Right. And like Gary said, this is not somebody who I'm advising you to, go ahead and make a trade for. I'm not saying he's going to have this great year. Nothing's guaranteed, right? But at 24 years old, Chase Young, we've seen guys, like I said, this is a position where guys don't get into their prime until 26, 27, right? So this is practice. For me, it's practice right now for Chase Young. And that's the beautiful thing about Dynasty is that, you're not built off 1 year, right? One bad year isn't going to fall your stock like crazy. But at the same time, Chase Young, if he puts the pieces together, whether it be San Fran, somewhere else, he's probably not going to get a multi-year contract. Might be a 1 year prove it. That's what what it should be.
We're talking about IDP, okay, especially in blended leagues. If somebody is going to offer you something really nice for Chase Young, take it. All right, just take it. Because you keep listening to the guys like us, we're going to find you other deeper plays. We've got even more and more edge rushers that have been coming on the last couple of years. Yes, it came with a little bit more of a rotation, and we're seeing some stack ups of some really good guys above par studs on the same teams. All right, so if you just talked to us 3 years ago, the list that actually is viable is a little bit longer than this. We could stretch this out into 20 good players that in deeper formats, these edge rushers are going to, be a bankroll of IDP production. So Chase Young holds his own. I think there's definitely, if I've got to ask you between him and say Huff and Greenard, who would you favor if, say, they all got a weak side starting position gig as an edge rusher somewhere?
I'm going to go in order. I'm going to say Greenard, then I'll go Chase Young, and then I'll say Huff. And to me, it's the unknowns with Huff, the undrafted free agent. Maybe something clicked, right? Maybe New York found a way to get the best out of him. I'm not, if he's having deficiency in run blocking, or I'm sorry, run defense, is he going to go somewhere else and figure that out? Maybe, right? So maybes. But when we're talking with Jonathan Greenard, me personally, I think he's going to stay there at least another year. So at least for that year, I know Jonathan Greenard. I know what his caliber is, and to me, I'm going to play safe on that one. I'll take Greenard. And then in number two, I'll roll the dice on Chase Young. We're talking about Dynasty. We're not talking about redraft. So redraft, I'm a little bit more hesitant. But I like Chase Young, and I'm not saying drop him. And if he's out there, maybe if you have a spot, pick him up. Maybe if there's somebody in your league who's like Gary, an Ohio State fan, maybe dish him out an offer, right? I think Gary might be too smart to take it, but somebody who's enamored in Ohio State, man, send those trades out, flood them, and see if
hit me up. I'll give you any Chase Young. I just, maybe it's just from Ohio State. I was so aggravated as watching him. I watched a lot more Ohio State during the time too. Unfortunately, I don't get to watch the game as much when I'm doing all this defensive talk and stuff with my buddies here over at IDP Plus IDP Guys Network. But you can't ignore him. I mean, that would be silly just to ignore him. So again, another change of pace, or whether he's not. I mean, he's got all kinds of upside left. And I like the Greenard take, because that's how I feel about it too, is that Greenard would be the most solid dude. I don't think I would worry about him signing somewhere else and disappointing that based off of what he's gave us. And you never know what that change might bring in the sack department. You know what I mean? It could be via his scheme. I mean, let's face it, defensive line. I think they got Sheldon Rakins, and
but he's a free agent too.
Right. So but that's your other best player on that interior defensive line. And it's kind of an average type line overall. I mean, just Jerry Hughes was a star on it last year or a year before. So with a little bit of adversity to build into it, I think I would stay with Greenard. I like Greenard in this tier too a lot.
And he might be somebody, Jonathan Greenard might be a name, like if it's coming up next year and you're doing a redraft. I know we're talking Dynasty, but if it's a redraft and, you know, you're watching the Watts, the Myles Garretts, the Crosbys go off the list, and you can get him maybe like 2 or 3 rounds later, maybe. But at that point, like, I'm taking him. You know, I'm not. You know what you're going to get with T.J. Watt. You know what you're going to get with Myles Garrett. But the price you have to pay, I think Jonathan Greenard kind of flies under the radar a little bit there.
Hey, I'm gonna let Johnny do his thing as we exit out of here. Just make sure you keep an eye out for that tier 2 edge rushers, man. This is where it goes deep. This is for those D-gens. Get it together. Meet us here in a couple of days and check out. Man, I'm excited about a guy named Jennings.
Spoiler alert. To all our viewers and listeners out there, thank you for tuning in to IDP Plus Trends again. I am Johnny Freakin' Fantasy. You can find me. My name is right under in blue on Twitter at Johnny Freakin' F1 with your co-host, the IDP tipster, Gary. Thank you as always, man. Look forward to bringing you our tier 2 edge rushers. Look for that video soon. And if you missed our linebackers, go back and hit that one too. That was a fun episode. So looking forward to hearing you again. Bless up until then.
Thank you for watching this IDP Guys video. If you like this content and you want more fantasy football content, click here. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos to help you master your IDP league, click here to subscribe.